Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you who have joined us for the session. Today, we have our first session of yet another exciting series on capitalism. This we will call as our third season. The first set of lectures were during the winter of 2021, where scholars like Dan Bromley, Einar Overby, Sabina Alkar expressed their views on the journey of capitalism. The second season was aired during the summer of 2022, with academicians like Katharina Pistor, Barbara Harris-White, Jayati Ghosh, Prabhat Patnaik, and others spoke to us on the issues and challenges of being a capitalist society. And today, we inaugurate our third season. We have with us Professor Arjun Jayadev, and the title of his session is Economics as Social Accounting. The South Asia Working Group shares a very special association with Professor Jayadev, as he has been a mentor since its inception. He has been part of a majority of our virtual as well as in-person events, guiding our members on their research and sharing his recent academic work and ideas. Because he's such a familiar face at our working group, I will skip the lengthy introduction and just mention that at present, Professor Jayadev is the Director of School of Arts and Sciences at Azim Premji University. For more details, please check out the speaker's bio on our event page. Over to you, Arjun.
Thanks very much, Anisha. Satvik. It's really kind of a pleasure to be here because of the fact that this is again a series which has just gone from strength to strength. And earlier today, I was taking a look at some of the very good talks that went before me. And it's also an honor to inaugurate the second session of the third session, as Anisha mentioned, of this series. What I thought I would do for this talk, given that it's also to economic students, is to present some work that I've been doing with Josh Mason of City University of New York in New York, and discuss a little bit about a different way of looking at capitalism and looking at the organizing principles around capitalism. So if you bear with me, many of these ideas are things that I would really try out on everyone here, and I look forward to any reactions that people may have, right? The title is Economics as Social Accounting, but I think one could have easily replaced it as Economics as Monetary Production or Capitalism and Monetary Production. The title is keeps varying depending on the audience I speak to. But let me just quickly tell you about how I would like to place this stuff. Okay? The first thing I think it's important to notice is that when we're talking about capitalism, especially as economists, there are two kinds of approaches. The one that we are most comfortable with and we know the most about is the view of capitalism as being driven, at least in economics, is being driven by the maximization of utility. Consumption values that are actually driving the process of capitalism. The accumulation of capital. Ultimately, it's all for consumption, and consumption mainly to maximize utility. If you are at graduate school, you will see that's actually the fundamental motivator of all actions according to our theories, right? The second
Arjun, I may just have to interrupt you here. You may want to expand the screen to the slide share mode.
Yeah.
And
sorry.
You may want to increase the volume because it's coming a little muffled for us.
Is this any clearer?
Slightly better, I would say. Yeah.
Sorry, maybe I'll just speak a little bit. Sometimes I try to move this. Sometimes it's not. Is this any better if I get closer to the computer?
Yes, much better. Yes.
Okay. All right. So I'll be closer to the computer. Maybe I'll just actually try to make this a little lower so I can be closer to the computer. And if you have trouble actually hearing me, please stop me, and I will I'll repeat myself. Right. So like I was saying, the second kind of approach to economics or to capitalism through economics is the much older idea that's driven by profits, right? Specifically, the need to generate money profits, the monetization of profits. And this is, if you will, if you take the Marxian view, right, of M, C, C prime, N prime, that's the kind of inner logic of capitalism. I would say that Both of these roughly correspond to two views of economics in general. Okay, the first I would call the real exchange view, and this is Keynes' term. And according to that, what really matters is the exchange between real factors. So what you see in the economy is really what's being exchanged is either utilities, which would be the neoclassical version, or labor time. This is again the old Smithian version onwards, right? So that's one kind of broad view. Anisha, am I clear, or is this am I still muffled?
You're still slightly muffled. Would you like to lose the headphones?
Let me try that, and if that doesn't work, I will maybe move to another room. Just give me a
Okay.
second. Sometimes
All right, no problem.
happens, yeah. Sorry about that. Is this any better?
Yes.
Is this any better?
Yes, it's not at least muffled. It's echoing now, but it's not muffled.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry about that. I don't know quite what to do.
I think we can go ahead with this. I think we can just go ahead with
Let me just
this.
see if I can move to another room, and if it's a little clearer in that room.
Okay.
If so, I will just continue. Is this any clearer?
Yes, this is much better.
Okay, so just give me a second. I might have to just bring my chair in. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry for the interruption. As you know, these are part of webinars.
Sorry about that.
No, that's fine.
Hopefully this will work better. All right. It's better. Otherwise, it's too painful for people to be listening to a muffled voice or an echoing voice for 45 minutes or even 10 minutes. All right. So let me just continue. Right. So as I was saying, the real exchange view, which argues that what really matters is exchange between real factors, utility or labor time. And there's an alternative view, which I would say is the Keynesian view, and it's really come through Minsky to Perry Merling, who is probably the biggest exponent of this, the money view, what Josh and I would call the political money view, which is what matters for capitalism is the organization of the web of commitments, of financial commitments, right? And this view, as I said, is a Minskian view. Minsky had a very nice phrase, but capitalism is essentially a financial system, and the peculiar behavioral attributes of a capitalist economy center on the impact of finance upon systemic behavior. So it's very much approaching capitalism as something that one understands really through understanding the operations of money. It's a very different kind of entry point into understanding capitalism. So what is this money view, or sometimes what we call the social accounting? It's really the idea that capitalism is organized through money networks, through a web of commitments. But immediately when you approach it from this, there are some difficulties. And I think, utility has had the advantage of having 100, 150 years of philosophers thinking about it and making claims around it, maybe 200 years around that. Money, on the other hand, thinking about it as the starting point is something that's much more difficult. And money itself is hard to make sense of in the classical view. I mean, why do we need money? People who are lay people actually say in order to do things, but economists have a much harder time even explaining the existence of money, right? So what I'm going to do in the rest of this talk is try to disentangle why that is the case. What are the difficulties around money and about thinking about money? I'm going to expand on a list that Perry had started a few years ago on the paradoxes of money, which make money kind of difficult, contentious, arguments are ill-tempered around them. And I'm hoping that by starting to discuss them, this is the beginning of thinking about ways in which to anchor capitalism in this web of commitments. Right? So I want to start with this picture. Right? When Josh and I are writing a book, and when we first started writing this book, we came across this fantastic, actually poster, which was on the Lower East Side in New York. Okay, and it's extremely lovely because whoever this person, Francis, is saying, free exchange, my private French and Italian lessons for your help with the basics of computers and cell phones. I can also teach you how to paint Renaissance style portraits, right? Now, anyone will recognize that this is both very quaint, unusual, also maybe somewhat romantic, because it involves a very specific double coincidence of wants, which is that someone should have skills in computers and cell phones, and the other person should have a skill in Renaissance and want to have Renaissance style portraits, right? But this double coincidence of wants is apparently, in terms of history of economics textbooks, is apparently the reason why we have money and no other reason. But and this idea, of course, has been something that's been there right through an economics textbook. If you actually read what Paul Samuelson says in this 1973 economics, he says, if we strip exchange down to its barest essential and peel off the obscuring layer of money, we find that trade between individuals or nations largely boils down to barter. So again, it's the same thing that we saw above. What's being exchanged is real values, not money. Right? David Graeber locates this in what he calls Smithian propensities, the propensity to truck in barter. And David Graeber is not very kind about Adam Smith in this case. He says that, that there's never been a historical example of actually barter coming, societies organized around barter. Okay? Now, this is one way of going about things, but they're all elements of what you could broadly consider a real exchange paradigm. What you're exchanging is real things, either real utility, which is a real underlying thing, which money reflects, or labor time, which is a real thing labor reflects. Right? If you take modern microeconomics and you go all the way to graduate school, you will be seeing Edgeworth box. Right? The idea of an Edgeworth box is what you're seeing is an exchange of utilities between people. You have the famous contract curve, and somewhere along the contract curve, you have Pareto efficiency. That's one way of thinking about it. Note there, all that's important is relative prices, but that's never really referred to in terms of rupees or dollars or whatever it is. Right? So you have, if you will, the anchoring principles are either utils, which is the kind of atom of utility, or a SNOT, socially necessary abstract labor time, which is the anchor of labor time. Okay? Again, the current economists would start with that. The alternative which Keynes proposed, okay, is the following. I'll read out the whole quote because it's useful. Right?
And Arjun, before you do that, you may have to share the screen again because it's become small again. Yes.
Goodness. Okay, I'm sorry. We seem to have a lot of technical problems here. Yeah, let me try
No problem.
to stop. Yeah. Any luck?
Full screen, please. Full screen.
Yeah, any luck?
Yeah.
Perfect.
So what Keynes says is the main reason why the problem of crises is unsolved is to be found in the lack of what might be termed a monetary theory of production, an economy which uses money but uses it merely as a neutral link between transactions and real things and real assets, and does not allow it to enter into motives or decisions might be called a real exchange economy. The theory which I desiderate would deal, in contradistinction to this, with an economy in which money plays a part of its own and affects motives and decisions, and is in short, one of the operative factors in the situation, so that the course of events cannot be predicted either in the long period or the short without a knowledge of the behavior of money. So Keynes had very centrally the idea that what needs to happen is we need to think about a system which he calls the system of monetary production. If you will, some people focus on the production part, some people focus on the monetary part, but the fundamental idea is that this is something that that money should really be the anchor around which we actually do many of these. Yeah. So what is this alternate starting point? The first claim is money has a value in and of itself. It's not simply just something which is reflecting real values. And what is this value? Well, it's a social technology. Many of you have seen talking sticks. These are things which in kindergartens, when people have to talk and they're all talking at the same time, the teacher hands out, this stick. So whoever has the stick can actually speak at that point. So it really should be seen as that, something that can coordinate human action, right? It's a social lubricant, right? Money customarily paid and received in exchange for other commodities, and this is the key important thing, without reference to the personal credit of the one who offers it. Okay, so this is where something is distinguished between credit and money, right? Money is something where it doesn't really depend on the personal credit of the person who offers it. And finally, one should see money as a means of final settlement. That's what it is. It erases residual relationships. While credit extends and delays final settlement, money is a final say that, okay, our relationship is now complete and we can go about in our own ways. And without that, it is impossible to actually imagine the extended production and reproduction of our processes, of our labor processes, because we do need to be able to meet people for whom we are both able to enter into relationship and exit from relationship. And that's what this web of commitments actually does. And that's what money can actually do. So that's the different starting point, which we feel has a long history and something that we think that really is another way of actually addressing the kind of modern capitalism that we want to analyze. Okay. So here are two simple contrasts, if you will, and say too simple because obviously you can complicate any one of these. But if you have this accounting view or social accounting view versus the real exchange view, what are the kind of basic forms of analysis that you would do? If the actor in the real exchange view is an agent, right? So we have agents who are maximizing utility or profits or whatever it is. In the accounting view, it's actually an institutional unit, the unit which in concrete terms gets inflows and outflows. So it could be a household, it could be a firm. It is actually an existing real life unit that we care about. And that is the actor that we're caring about. What does the actor do or the agent do? In the real exchange view, what they're doing is optimization under constraints. So we spend a lot of time going through that exercise in economics, optimization under constraints. Whereas in the accounting view, what are you doing? Basically, you're trying to survive. You're trying to make sure that money coming in is greater than money going out. And that is the kind of activity of the accounting, of the institutional unit. What is an economy? In the real exchange view, you can say it's N plus N agents, N producers and consumers. The economy in the accounting view is the set of transactions in a given political unit. It could be a state, it could be a country, it could be a multinational. But the point is, it's a given unit which we're interested in. Let's say the EU is an economy, not just a nation, right? Or N plus N agents. What are the dynamics of a system if you want to actually look at it? Now, in the real exchange view, if you take a look at anything that people are doing, it's optimal consumption. If you pick from random things, optimal consumption, that's what is actually driving the system. From the accounting view, and here it shares a lot of affinity with the old Marxian view, you're maximizing money income. That's what the purpose is of the particular unit. What's the atomic unit of analysis? In real exchange, it's utility. In accounting view, it's the money flows. What you're interested in is money flows. These are the last three are actually ways in which we see actually people, the style of analysis, if you will, right? In the real exchange view, it's forward causal from principle. So you start with the agent which is maximizing utility, change the utility function a little bit, and then you get some, some expected outcomes. Whereas in the accounting view, you take a look at all things which are happening and then say these are the kind of things which could have caused it, right? So that's the way of analysis. Finally, what are the ways in which the system coheres? In the real exchange view, it's general equilibrium. In the accounting view, as long as money settlement happens, the system can continue the way it does. Once money settlement starts to be challenged and you have liquidity crises and so on, that's when interesting things happen and the system starts to become incoherent. Finally, what's the relationship between money and the real world? In the real exchange view, it has no value except of being a numeraire. And the accounting view, it's a productive social technology. So I would say that these are just two very different ways of approaching the world and approaching capitalism, if you like. Yeah? Okay, now as I promised, I'm going to spend about 20-25 minutes, really just talk 20 minutes, maybe just talking about why it is that the second view is, let's say, a more uh, specific view. It's one which hasn't gotten as much traction as, if you will, that the real exchange view. Then there are probably many reasons, but a critical reason is that there are many tensions about understanding money. Right? And I would say that the paradoxes that make analysis very hard. Money's and you see periodic, battles about what money really is. In our own age, we've had, for example, the rise of cryptocurrency and the debates around whether that's money and so on. But here are the paradoxes, right? I think Perry has 3 or 4 paradoxes. We have 8 paradoxes, right? What are the paradoxes? And I'll go into them each, in a little detail. One, money is both objective and arbitrary. I'll explain each of these. It's a thing, it's a real thing in the world and a unit. It's both public and it's private. It's both binding to human action and anonymizing. It's both record keeping and reshaping. It's both universal and hierarchical. It's both rigid and elastic. And it's both the beginning of a process and the end of a process. So no wonder this very strange object actually has so many kind of different intuitions and debates that go around it. So what I want to do is, for the next 20 minutes, just talk a little bit about them, and then we can get into a discussion about how important these things are, whether it's a different way of looking at capitalism, and going forward. Right? All right. Objective and arbitrary. If you, at some point, if you come to my age, you actually start to look not just at the bit of information in the top left-hand corner, which is the price. This is a bag of flour in India online. You also start to take a look at the amount per serving calories on the bottom right-hand corner, right? Which is 350 in this case, right? Now, what I want to kind of underline here is that the calorie has a meaning which is comparable across spaces. Right? There's a physical meaning of what a calorie is, and I forget exactly what it is. I always forget. It's something about how much energy it requires to burn something. Right? I wish I had my science a little bit more nailed down, but you all have done this. Okay, so the calorie has a meaning which is something that's there across the board. But what is the 60 rupees referencing? It's actually, when you think about it, it is an objective fact about this thing, but what is it referencing? It's not very clear that there's an underlying referent in the same way that there's an underlying referent for the calorie. And yet it has meaning, right? We organize our lives around this. But if the price was 70 or 80, its meaning is only relative to other things which have different prices, and your income, which is also denominated in nominal terms. Let me put it like this. Suppose I was to, think about buying the amount of flour that I needed to. Let's say I buy 5 kgs, so 300 rupees of flour. And let's say my house rent is 20,000 rupees, right? But both of these are nominal money values. They have some meaning, but there's no way that I can make them commensurate in the same way that I can make a calorie commensurate. Right, that the calories have the same sort of meaning in terms of burning. Right, it's not that it's not that it's the same amount of labor time or the same amount of utility. It's not easy to say those kind of things, right? So in some sense, it's both objective and arbitrary, which makes it very difficult to fully understand what it's actually doing. So that's the first paradox I'd like to kind of underline. Okay, here's a second. It's a thing in the world and a unit, right? This is 1 rupee in 2002. It's a coin which unfortunately almost never gets used now because you cannot buy anything for 1 rupee anymore. We all know these kind of things. We all brought up on stories of people finding treasures, with gold pieces or whatever it is, and these constitute a thing in the world. Right? Or you have a rupee note, it's a thing in the world. Right? But it's not just a thing in the world, it's a unit in the world. And that doesn't really, that's something which is very different from many other objects in the world. Right? So when I see what's on the right, this is a made-up statement of First Citizens Bank, right? One can imagine, one has this imagination that there, I should have used dollars and dollars, but imagine that this was $1, that, and many people do have this intuition that if you go to First Citizens Bank, there's the equivalent of these kind of coins in a vault. And we are brought up on the notion that there's some actual physical thing there. And if not physical thing, once we become more sophisticated, we say there's some reserves or whatever it is. But it's very clear that these two things trade with each other. They're the same thing. You can go and exchange this 1 rupee for, or get 1 rupee coin from the bank, right? So it's a thing in the world, but it's also a unit of measurement, right? And that also makes it somewhat tricky to fully imagine what this strange object is, right? Here's another one. Okay, it's both record keeping and reshaping. Okay, what do I mean by that? When all of us do this, we get our bank statement, and we see that clearly as a record of our lives, right? This is how much we spent on our credit card. This is the amount we spent on our insurance. This is the amount that came in from my employer. There was an account transfer I made. I had to pay my electricity bill. I had to pay my water utility bill, so on and so on, right? And so it's a reflection, if you will, of the kind of transactions I did. It's a record keeping of those. But it's not simply that, all right? Notice that if you receive, I think the third line, right, which is account transfer in, right? This is a measure of, let's say, this person is getting a loan from someone, right? So while it's keeping a record of this person's life, it's also a statement which is telling them how they're reshaping their lives. So getting this loan, they're potentially going, let's say, to college or buying something. Money is, in some sense, because it's being emitted by the banking system, it's not simply that the banks are keeping record of your payments and your receipts, but they're also allowing you to reshape your life. And of course, by now, endogenous money is nothing new. The system generates money. So here's this odd thing, this thing which is both a thing and a unit. It's also objective and arbitrary. It measures your life, but it can reshape your life, right? Again, this is a paradox. At some level, how can something which is record also be something which reshapes, almost regenerates, right? How is that possible? Okay, this is the one which I think causes the most discomfort among people, why you actually see some of the more ill-tempered arguments about money, right? It is both fundamentally public and fundamentally private, right? And let's think very clearly about this notion of deposits versus cash. And if I had, I do this with my students all the time. I ask them to take out their wallets and to take a look at the rupee note. And usually there'll be a statement saying something like, I promise the bearer the sum of 200 rupees, and it's signed by the central government, the governor of the Reserve Bank of India, or whichever bank that you're actually, which has issued that note, or rather backs that note, right? And so, in some sense, it's a public debt. It's something that it's something that the public the state owes you, or the Reserve Bank owes you, something which is public that's owed to you. Okay? But the moment you go and you cash it or put it in the bank, and let's say this is a private bank, let's say it's Citibank or Axis Bank or whatever it is, then that becomes a liability and an owing of that bank, right? And so these two trade one for one. What is a public debt and a private debt trade for one. That's the price of power. And they're interchangeable. Right? So, and notice that, therefore, you get this kind of extreme discomfort. Some people would like it to be all completely public and treat banks as a public utility, national-owned banks, and so on. Other people are extremely uncomfortable with the idea of the state having any kind of say over what people consider money, whether it's bank or actually the state. And so they want something completely decentralized, completely private. So you have crypto, right? And again, both of them are battling over the publicness or privateness of money. Again, something, and it's both. At any given point of time, it would not function in our system if it was not. Okay. MMT is the other version, right? That all money should be seen as public money in that sense. All right. The other thing about money, which is paradoxical and discomforting, I would say, right? It's both binding and anonymizing. An enormous amount of modern economic life is in this particular activity, keeping records, right? And why keeping records? Because we are able to interact with a very wide web of people in society and make promises over time and space in a way that earlier societies were not able to. And once in a while, if you missed a payment or you have a credit card dispute or something, some of you will know it will follow you for the next 30 years. I have one dispute with with a credit card when I was in graduate school, and once in a while I'll get a collector asking for that money. Right? So in that sense, money kind of binds you, right? And there's a sort of binding relationship. But at the same time, what does it do? The moment you have a settlement, it erases relationships. Right? I often ask my students what would happen if they went to their moms, when they were 18 and say, look, I've totaled up how much you've paid for me, over this time, and here's a check, thank you. Or if they went, at lunchtime or dinner time and said, that was a great meal, and thank you, and paid for it, exactly what would happen. Then, in India, they would get beaten. And the story about that is quite clear, right? Because what are you saying? That in doing that, you're erasing or ending a relationship, right? You're actually, what is seen as a human bond has been reduced to a bond which you are describing as one that can be ended. So money should be able to allow us to keep our promises, but also to end our relationships. And it makes it very uncomfortable because it's doing both of these activities at any given time. Another very interesting paradox about dealing with money. Notice all of these are just different ways in which money is one of these things which is a hard thing to start off with, if you will, as an anchoring principle for thinking about capitalism. Okay. I'm just looking at my time. I've got probably another 5-10 minutes before I wrap up. Okay, and then we can go on to questions. Okay. Here is another important fact about money, right? It's both flat and hierarchical. And let me just explain what I mean by that, right? It seems pretty obvious that whether it's Anisha, Satvik, or me, if we go to a store and we, put out money, the bank, the store owner really doesn't mind as long as he's getting paid or she's getting paid in money, right? So all of us are in that sense equal, to the store owner, right? So in that sense, the ownership of money allows a sort of flatness in society, and it's actually therefore very kind of freeing in some sense. I talked about bank binding and anonymizing. It's freeing of people from their particular social context or their background in a way that many other situations wouldn't allow them to do. But if you actually take a look at the way that money is set up, Perry calls it the inherent hierarchy of balance sheets, the inherent hierarchy of money. And the notion there is that there are monies which are at different levels. Now, it's easiest to see this with respect to what our assets are. If you look at the right-hand side, the private sector, our assets are deposits, right? So we have most of our money as bank deposits, right? But what is the bank deposit? The bank deposit is a liability of the banking system, right? So what is our asset, what we treat as money, is in fact the promise of another agent higher up in the system, in this case, banks. Right? But for banks, what is money? Now, for banks, what is money is currency or reserves. Right? Banks will only trade with each other and will consider their transactions settled if they settle in actual reserves, if the reserves are netted out at the end of the day with the central bank. Right? So in some sense, money is already hierarchical in the sense that for us, money is the promise of the banks. For banks, money is the promise of the central bank, which could be because the central bank will owe the bank's reserves or currency. And as you go up the chain, you could also have, for the central bank, it could be gold, it could be treasury bonds, or it could be actually international currency. The dollar could be their asset. And so their asset is dollars, and it's the liability of the Fed. Right. So you can see this hierarchy of money, which is quite central, because that's the place where the money, either central bank or the banking system, can expand or contract liabilities lower down in the system. Yeah. All right. So one way that economists have tried to get an analytical grip is to distinguish money, means of final settlement, from credit. Promise to pay money means of delaying final settlement. And this is, again, classically what Perry mentions in his story. But you don't have to have only one layer or two layers. There are many layers. Your promise is not money. It could be money, but your bank's promises, right? So it sort of keeps going up this hierarchy that we're talking about. Here's an example of a hierarchy, which the gold standard. Okay. For those lower down, the promises to pay those above. So if I take credit from Sakwik, I promise to pay in deposits. My bank promises to pay in currency, the other bank, or in reserves. The central bank, whose liability currency or reserves are, they promise to pay in something else. So you can see that right up the hierarchy, you have different kind of qualities or levels of money. Now, for all of us, really mostly deposits is all that matters, right? For the vast majority. But for the system to work as a whole, the promises have to go up. All right. So I'm going to skip this and just describe, 2 or 3 things, right? The relationship between currency and deposits, they exchange at a very interesting price, which is called par, I just mentioned. Right? There's no reason for them to exchange it a 1-for-1, but our systems are set up for that. But there are other monies which exchange with different prices. So securities, which is a promise to pay, is exchanged for deposits, which is also a promise to pay, at something called the interest rate. Okay? It's really one of the prices of money. And further up, the central bank promises to exchange currency for, let's say, we could say gold, but really you could say the US dollar. That's called the exchange rate, right? So money itself has 4 or 5 different prices, and the prices really matter depending on where in the hierarchy you are. Again, a hard concept to get around, because we used to think of money as flat, universal. It's the same thing. It isn't. It's actually embedded in hierarchical. Okay. I'm almost done. As I've said, 40 minutes I will try to do. It's both the beginning and the end. I said that this will be the last couple of slides. Everyone's familiar with the formulation in the first thing. Utility is equal to utility of consumption. And if it's leisure, the first derivative is positive. If it's labor, the first derivative is negative according to the standard way of looking at it. That's the organizing principle, if you will, of mainstream economics, of neoclassical economics, of our understanding, therefore, of how, capitalism works, right? The other is the Marxist circuit of capitalism, right? MC C prime M prime, or MC M prime, this should have a prime with it, which says that what's actually happening is money values go in, something is produced, commodities are produced, they're sold, and you get more money at the end of it. And that's the logic of the system. It's not consumption, it's money profits. Right? So in some sense, if you take the second view, that is the strange thing about money is it's both the ends and the beginnings of actually the logic of capital. And the logic of capital is not about consumption, not about producing reduced values. If it happens to do so, that's great, but it's not, the kind of purpose or the drive, if you will, of capitalism. Coming back to the whole question of capitalism. Yeah? So there are 3 metaphors that one could have of how to think about money. Okay. So the first is socially necessary abstract labor time. If you read Adam Smith, he talks about beavers and deer and so on, and people spending more time to catch one than the other. So you have this notion that the economy is run on labor time, and Adam Smith in the Forest is the story that you want to think. The other second story, which is more modern, is the usual story, water on the beach. So there are two people walking along the beach. One person wants oranges, one person wants fish, and vice versa. And they're walking along the beach. They call to each other, and then they discover there's a relative price in terms of fish and whatever it is, oranges, and they exchange with each other, right? So these are the two metaphors that you have. The metaphor that Josh and I would like to say is that money is something like cow clickers. What do I mean by cow clickers? It's a very strange kind of game that was played on Facebook. Okay, and this was the game. Right? It was a social network game. Okay, and it was supposed to be a deconstructive satire social game. The idea is to earn clicks by basically clicking on a cow every 6 hours. Okay, and once you clicked, and if the user received clicks, in your cow was clicked, you'd get Mooney, was what it was called. Right? And it's supposed to be a joke. Interestingly, people got interested in this, right? And people clicked cows for no other reason except clicking cows. And people collected Mooney. And you can imagine now that if people want Mooney, they find ways to get people to click on their cows. Right? So this is another way of thinking about how activity is organized. Some people have money. They find ways to generate more money, and that organizes social activity. So money sort of drives that. That's another approach, another metaphor that we like to see, right? So I'd like to end by just plugging what Josh and I are doing, which is this book, as I said, right? And the idea there is that nominal values can and do evolve autonomously from the workings of the credits and settlement structures of the monetary world. That money, while it's difficult, becomes a better starting point for understanding capitalism. And finally, for those who are interested in capitalism as a political order, it's pretty essential to understand the order of money, because once you see it for what it is, it allows for different political choices. And if the point is to change the world, or to think about capitalism differently and in some sense revolutionarily, or to want to change what you see as its shortcomings, you must understand that. I'm going to stop here. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to go back to the other room because I've been disturbing everyone in my house at this point. Sorry.
All right. While Arjun adjusts himself and people take some time to seep the thoughts in, I have one bulletin point to make, that we have the South Asia Working Group mandate meeting this 10th February at 6:30 Indian Standard Time. And I will put in the link for the mandate form in the chat box. And please, all the members, do put in your views so that it can help us channelize our future work. That is for the year of 2023. What are your thoughts for this working group? Are we doing well? How would you like to reshape the work that we're doing? So I'll put a link there. And now I will hand over the floor to Satvik for the question and answer session.
Thank you, Anisha. Thank you, Arjun, for this wonderful lecture. I have some question, of course, as usual, but I will open the floor if anyone has any question. If you need more time, I can start the ice-breaking question by myself. Yeah, I can start it. Nobody is raising their hands. So, okay, my question is, the modern version of money, whether it's a coin or a paper thing, printed something on it. Do you consider this as a indication of capitalism? Why I ask this rather stupid question is because even before the typical use of certain object as a money, there were other things to conduct exchange, like the poster you shared with me. So I'm not going to that exchange between piano and computer teaching or language teaching. I was thinking about the time when bones or shells or paper is used to make exchanges. Do you see any difference between those exchanges and the exchanges that take place in the present time? because you said that money itself not only it has its own value. If I haven't understood, if I have understood correctly. So do you see them, I mean, following the same pattern or use or?
Yes. No, no. So I understand the question. A couple of things. I mean, the first thing we start with um, is it specific to capitalism? And the answer is no. Obviously, money is preceded, and commodity forms of money are preceded capitalism. I'm not that clear, so I'm going to speak a little louder, okay? And if I can't be heard, please let me know, okay? So I said that I know, money precedes capitalism, of course, right? And commodity money specifically does as well. Um, so I don't see that as, indicative of capitalism. What I want to suggest is that if we're going to start with a money view of capitalism, that continues to be one of the paradoxes which make it hard for people to think about money, right? Because many people think about money as a thing, but we really ought to be speaking about it more as a unit. Even though it can be a thing, in modern capitalism, it's much more a unit, that's used to actually, um, facilitate exchange, facilitate development commitments, and so on. So that's what I would say, to that. I think it's an interesting, I think you're right to actually kind of challenge me on saying are all of these things about capitalism? And the answer is not all of these things are about capitalism. My only claim is that it is important to understand capitalism through the lens of money. That's how I would call that. So
Thank you.
How would you square the hierarchical notion of money with post-Keynesian endogenous money in the sense that private credit drives high-powered money? There's nothing actually that's in contradiction here at all, right? All that's being said is that, and in fact, clearly, if I have to go back, the private system, of course, creates money, right? And so it's both the banking system, which creates deposits, and the public system, which allows for greater liquidity through its own operations, right? So both can help create money. For us, what's relevant is the private creation of, when I say us, I mean the general public, the private creation of money through endogenous money creation, through loans and so on. So there's nothing that's in contradiction here.
Okay. Any more questions? Yes, Ryan. Please. You are muted. For some reason, we can't hear you. I don't see you muted, but we can't hear your voice.
Hello.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Okay. I think I got the bottom line that the money view emphasizes the political view of economic analysis. It and my mind got instantly connected in campaigns by particularly global civil society movements in debt cancellation, transparency and accountability. And I think this economic perspective, really fits or uh, sort of makes sense of this activist initiatives to cancel debts in the global south or make national accountability, transparency movements, etc. How do you make sense of this?
This is a good question, Ryan. So I go back to what I understand to be the driving dynamic of capitalism, right? Which is that it's pumping out money values. The purpose is not consumption, but the pumping out of money values. Now, it doesn't matter if you're talking about a corporation or you're talking about a nation. Money is coming in, the money has to go out. That's the logic that's underlying it. And if you take a look at the historical development of societies, it's only by arresting that countries have been able to find capital to grow, right? So East Asia is a very famous example of capital controls and so on, right? Now, what's happened, I think, and you're right, that in the last 20, 25 years, there has been a broad acceptance that well, I wouldn't say broad acceptance, but a political movement, which, if you want to call it neoliberalism or whatever it is trying to facilitate the ease of that last moment. M-prime, money coming back. So once money comes in, it can't be arrested in creating values. It has to be something that can be actually pumped out back. Now, obviously, the counter to that is to say, look, many of these things are illegitimate, or you're demanding too much, or you're actually destroying the actual producers of value by demanding your money back. Therefore, the debt cancellation kind of arguments. Now, another friend of YSI, Martin Guzman, who used to be the finance minister of Argentina, would say there's also this kind of typically what would happen is that INET or whichever organization would be too rosy, would paint too rosy a picture of when debts can actually be returned. And so you would always systematically overestimate the capacity to pay, to repay debt. So they have this really nasty spiral of, continuing indebtedness, continuing movements that you need to actually get rid of debt and so on. So we are in a moment, I think, historical moment where there's now challenging of the kind of naturalness of that M-prime movement of money being, reverted back to global capital in a way that maybe 10, 15 years ago, it was more unchallenged. I hope that helps answer. I'm not sure whether that was, anywhere the kind of question you were asking, but.
And also, okay, yeah, trips. Okay, yeah. So I just want to ask you a follow-up question, if I may. Not about this thing, but something else. I was wondering, I mean, yes, there is so much contradiction in money, like you have indicated, but money is also a production of social contract. Like if I have a piece of paper which the society consider to be valuable or a medium of exchange, the state can decide, like what happened during demonetization in India overnight. Okay, this is not legal anymore. So, and in these days, money is created not always in physical shape, like you have indicated, but sometime on a computer, you create a loan by typing the amount, and also paper thing like a contract. That also you have indicated. So the direction which money is going with the digitization and everyone. So if this creation of money continues, is it not ultimately losing its value, like you said, like if I use the word innate value of money?
So say a little bit more, Satvik. You're saying if anyone can create money, will it lose its value? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean.
Okay, so there's a very famous, among the Keynesians, post-Keynesians, they say something quite nice, which is anyone can create money. The difficulty is getting it accepted, right? So, for example, Satvik, you can create you can write on a piece of paper, Satvik currency, accepted. No one will accept. Maybe a local, grocer might accept it, right? As a form of an IOU. So clearly, that's where the hierarchy comes in. Which organizations are we going to trust their liabilities to actually function and be widely accepted and to retain their value? Now, clearly, banks can create money, and there's no real limit to the money they can create. Of course, there are some limits, regulatory limits, which you can think of in terms of asset requirements and so on. But really, in some sense, it can be far beyond the kind of limitations that you might have if it's tied to gold or whatever it is, right? That people have had in the past. Having said that, your question is it too elastic in effect, right?
Yeah.
That's the question. Is it too elastic? And the answer to that is I don't know, right? I mean, at any given point of time, are we creating too much liquidity, too little liquidity? Is very hard to actually say. Now, one way to look at it is looking at whether there's, and I don't fully subscribe to this, but whether if you believe that should reflect in inflation, whether you're seeing actually the kind of inflation that you should see. And the answer there is really, it seems that whatever inflation that we've seen, at least at the current moment, seems to have not been driven by that kind of process, right? Of too much liquidity being created. So in that sense, I'm not sure that money is losing its value in the way that people are worried about. Having said that, there are people who strongly believe that that is the thing that's happening, and they're quite often attracted by cryptocurrency and so on. But that's something else, and I'll leave it later. Anisha.
Anisha, please.
Yes. So I wanted to have your opinion on how do you and where do you place the CBDCs, the central bank digital currency, between public and private, right? So now if everybody's cash is going to become like a token, which is going to be with the central bank, are we losing the anonymity that cash provided? So, so how do you place this entire CBDC argument in terms of money being public-private, if it fits that kind of distinction?
I think CBDC is very much, it's a digital form of currency notes, right? And it's issued by the central bank. It's regulated. I see it as being much less different from any other currency notes. It just happens to be digital in this space, right? So in some sense, it's doing away. It's using the technology of crypto. But it's not, its regulatory structure is very much a central bank regulatory structure. So it's very much I would say it's very much in the public domain. So I don't think it's private in that sense at all. I don't have much to say about them. I think they're new. I don't even know what the larger purpose is. And again, I don't know what the larger purpose of crypto is in general, but I don't have much to say about it.
We have another question from Abhinav.
Yeah, but that's only because it probably doesn't fit Abhinav. And when you look at currency, we find a promissory from the central bank, which is not the case with coins as a currency. It's coins continue. I mean, if you had large enough coins, it works exactly the same way. So it is a promise of the central bank to give back.
So anyone has any question? Yes, thanks. Yeah. No? Okay. So Anisha, I think with that, we can end. If you have any question, that's another thing.
So I think most of our members here would have questions. So we will take it offline to the non-recorded session. And we are in time to close. It's been an hour approximately. So the 3 minutes remaining. So I will use those 3 minutes to thank our speaker of the day. Thank you so much, Arjun, for joining us for the first session on the third series of our Dissecting Capitalism. I think it's been a wonderful start to think a bit more deeply about money in capitalist societies. And to all the members who've joined us today, thank you so much. And please do fill in the form, which is going to help us prepare the mandate for this year. And Satvik, I think now we can stop the recording and move into our candid session.
Thank you very much, Arjun.